On the 16th of May, 2019, an Irish academic named Séamus Lawless is standing on the summit of Mount Everest and sends a text to his wife. He's done it, and he's coming home. A few hours later, he would disappear forever, his body never to be found. But to understand how a professor of computer science found himself at an altitude of 8,800 meters, we need to go back 40 years to a small Irish town on the coast. The town of Bray is in County Wicklow, just south of Dublin, where the hills meet the coast of the Irish Sea. It was here, in July of 1979, that Séamus Lawless was born, the seventh and youngest child in the large Irish family of Jimmy and Betty Lawless. He had one brother and 5 sisters, and the house was always noisy, crowded, and full of life. One day his father brings home a copy of National Geographic and gives his son the pull-out map inside, a large, glossy map, showing the route up the south face of Everest. To Jimmy, it's just a pretty picture, an interesting thing from a magazine. But Séamus pins the poster to his bedroom wall and never takes it down. Every night before bed, he looks at the thin line of the route snaking its way to the summit at 8,848 meters, and that line etches itself into his memory so deeply that it stays there for decades. He would later say of it, simply, "It was a childhood dream, but I never thought it would actually happen." Because instead of the mountains, Séamus chose a completely different path. He went to Trinity College Dublin, one of Europe's oldest universities, and would remain there for the next 20 years of his life. First, a bachelor's in computer science, then a PhD, then another diploma in statistics, all within the same walls, as if he'd found his own base camp and decided to build his ascent from there. And here's the thing. He excelled to such a degree that the university awarded him a gold medal, Trinity's highest academic honor for an undergraduate degree. In 2012, at the age of 33, Séamus was appointed an Usher Assistant Professor, which is kind of like a seat at the head table in Trinity's academic world, one of the most prestigious appointments for a young researcher. From there, things accelerated. He worked on artificial intelligence and data personalization at the ADAPT Research Center, published over 100 academic papers, supervised 10 PhD students through to their graduation, and led key university projects. By 2019, Séamus had everything that's considered a success: a brilliant career, an international reputation, nearly 2,000 citations of his work, a wife, Pamela, who he often referred to as his best friend, and a young daughter, Emma. His colleague, Professor Jane Ohlmeyer, would later say something about him that became a kind of unofficial obituary. Shay was, quite simply, the kindest man in the world. And so, for this kindest man in the world, this professor with a gold medal and a stable life, that poster from National Geographic is no longer on his office wall. It's long gone, taken down, lost, forgotten. But the route up the south face of Everest is still in his head. And somewhere around the age of 36, that route begins to transform from a memory into a plan. Around 2015, something clicks. Séamus is 36, sitting in his office at Trinity, and he makes the decision to climb Mount Everest. Now, let's be clear about something. The Séamus Lawless of 2015 is not a mountaineer. He isn't even someone who regularly hikes in the mountains. He doesn't belong to any climbing club or federation. He has no experience with high-altitude rope work, not the slightest clue what the Khumbu icefall is really like away from the glossy pages of a magazine. He is, in essence, an academic with a desk job who's decided to climb the roof of the world. It's a bit like a math professor announcing that in 4 years he's going to compete in the Olympics. But Séamus approaches it the way he approaches everything, like a researcher. He draws up a plan and starts with the basics. He loads up a 22-kilogram pack and, every weekend, heads for the hills of County Wicklow, the very ones visible from his hometown of Bray. Then he adds the Mourne Mountains in the north and the Kerry Ridges in the southwest of Ireland. The mountains in Ireland aren't high, 1,000 meters at most, but they're wet, windy, and they're a perfect ground for sheer stubbornness. At the same time, he learns to work with ropes at climbing gyms and in abandoned quarries, and every winter he travels to Scotland for winter skills courses, where he's taught how to walk on ice, cut steps, and not to panic when there's nothing beneath his feet. And here's a detail that says a lot about his character. He hires a sports psychologist named Niall O'Donoghue, who teaches him one simple thing: Focus only on what you can control and let go of everything else. On Everest, everything else means the weather, avalanches, cerebral edema, and a queue of 200 people on a narrow ridge above a sheer drop. But that's still a long way off. Séamus himself treats the whole thing with typical Irish humor. When friends ask why he's doing it, he replies, "I'm turning 40 in July, and my friends are joking that Everest is my midlife crisis." He says it with a smile, but behind the joke is a dead serious 4-year plan designed to turn a desk-bound academic into someone who can survive at an altitude where the air holds only a third of the oxygen we're used to. But you don't climb Everest alone, and Séamus knows this perfectly well. In March of 2016, a strange thing happens in Ireland. Around 30 completely ordinary people, not professional climbers, not mountain guides, not athletes, come together with a single, shared idea. They want to put an Irish team on the summit of Everest. The person who brings them together is a man named Ian Taylor, one of the few Irishmen who has already been to Everest and has founded his own trekking company. Taylor knows what altitude is, and he knows that the dream of Everest is one thing, but the reality is something else entirely. The reality is 2 months away from home, temperatures dropping below -40, and the sobering fact that roughly 1 in every 100 people who attempt to climb this mountain never comes back. And reality does its work quickly. Of the 30 dreamers, only 20 remain after a few months, then 10, then even fewer. Some realize they can't handle it physically. Others can't afford it financially, since a commercial expedition to Everest costs anywhere from 30,000 to 100,000 euros. Some just sober up when they learn the details. By the time the plan starts to take shape, that group of 30 has dwindled to just 4. Séamus Lawless, Jenny Copeland, Emma Hickey, and Suzanne Stroker. Emma and Suzanne would later drop out for their own reasons, but it's within this group of 4 that the real work begins. For Séamus, the most important person in that group of 4 becomes Jenny Copeland, a physiotherapist from County Meath, a mother of 4, a woman who, at first glance, doesn't look at all like someone who's about to take on the highest mountain on the planet. But it's with her that Séamus begins to train as a rope team, with her that he goes climbing, and with her that he plans every preparatory ascent. They become something like a pair in a rowing shell, 2 people moving in the same rhythm, completely dependent on one another. The team calls itself Ireland on Everest, and they deliberately model themselves on a story that's a source of pride for the entire Irish climbing community. The first Irish expedition to Everest back in 1993, led by Dawson Stelfox. Back then, the Irish climbers weren't being hauled up the mountain for a fee. They were a proper team, with a spirit of mutual support and self-reliance. Séamus and his teammates want the same thing, even though the gulf between their experience and that of the '93 expedition is about the size of the Himalayas. For a man used to planning everything 4 years in advance, however, this isn't a problem yet. It's just another variable in the equation that needs to be solved. The first real test comes in 2017, when Séamus and Jenny board a flight to Kathmandu. For both of them, it's their first trip to the Himalayas. And the difference between the hills of Ireland and what they see from the plane window as they approach Nepal is roughly the same as the difference between a puddle in a backyard and the Atlantic Ocean. The mountains here don't end. They stretch out in every direction to the horizon, and every single one of them is higher than anything that exists in Ireland. The plan is ambitious, to climb 2 peaks in one expedition, Mera Peak and Island Peak. Mera Peak is 6,476 meters, the highest so-called trekking peak in Nepal. The word trekking makes it sound almost harmless, like it's just a long walk, but in reality, it means glaciers, oxygen starvation, and temperatures that will turn the water in your bottle to solid ice in 20 minutes. Island Peak is slightly lower, 6,189 meters, but technically more difficult, with a steep ice wall just before the summit that requires ropework and crampons. Between the 2 peaks lies the Amphu Labtsa Pass at 5,845 meters, a narrow, icy saddle you have to cross to get from one valley to another. And at the end of the route, the trail leads them to Everest Base Camp, and Séamus sees the mountain of his childhood for the first time not on a poster, but in person. A vast, white, indifferent pyramid set against a deep blue sky. They summit both peaks successfully. It's a commercial expedition, with guides, porters, and preset camps. And there's no shame in admitting that. For a first time in the Himalayas, that format is sensible and logical. Séamus climbs to 6,476 meters, a personal altitude record, almost twice as high as any point he'd ever stood on before. But here's the thing, 6,500 meters is a threshold. And beyond that threshold, it's a whole different game. Above 7,000 meters, the human body begins to slowly shut down. Brain cells die from a lack of oxygen, the blood thickens, and the lungs can fill with fluid. But his expedition to Nepal didn't give him that experience. The experience of operating in what they call the death zone. Between the point Séamus reached and the summit of Everest, there's still over 2 vertical kilometers, and those 2 kilometers are the most dangerous on the planet. For his next step, Séamus looks not to the Himalayas, but to the other side of the globe, Alaska. In the summer of 2018, he and Jenny fly to Anchorage, and from there, they're flown to the Kahiltna Glacier at the foot of Denali. At 6,190 meters, it's the highest point in North America, and it used to be called Mount McKinley. And this is where everything changes, fundamentally. In Nepal, they had porters carrying their gear, camps already set up, warm tea waiting at every stop. On Denali, there's none of that. Here, you haul your own gear, a pack on your back and a sled in tow, loaded with food, fuel, a tent, and everything else. You set up your own camp. You melt your own snow for water. You decide when to push on and when to wait. It's a whole other level of self-sufficiency. And that's exactly why Séamus came here, to see if he could truly survive in the mountains without anyone else's help. Denali tests him immediately and without warning. At 3,350 meters, not even halfway up the mountain, the team gets hit by a storm and is pinned down for 8 days. 8 days in a tent, battered by the wind. 8 days without moving up. 8 days just waiting for the weather to decide whether it will let you pass. For a man used to controlling variables and making plans, this is a special kind of torture, just sitting there, accepting that nothing is in your hands. But a weather window finally opens, and they make their move. They reach the high camp, push for the summit, and make it to the top, 6,190 meters. And then, Jenny Copeland does something she would later call a test of inner fortitude. They descend from the high camp all the way to the bottom in one continuous push, without stopping to camp for the night. That's kilometers of vertical descent over snow and ice, on legs that haven't had a proper rest in 3 weeks. Séamus would later describe Denali succinctly and perfectly. My favorite and my hardest climb. Favorite because it was the first time he felt like a real mountaineer, not just a client with a guide. Hardest because Denali showed him exactly where the edge of his limits lay. But there's one number that spoils the beauty of this picture. His new personal best is 6,190 meters, and the summit of Everest is 8,848. Between those two numbers lies a chasm of almost 2,700 vertical meters, and most of that chasm is in a zone where Séamus Lawless has never been in his life. And this is where he makes a decision that climbers, journalists, and bloggers all over the world would debate after his death. In mountaineering, there's an unwritten rule for preparing for Everest. Before you attempt the roof of the world, you should first summit at least one of the easier 8,000ers. The usual choice is Cho Oyu, a mountain 8,188 meters high, often called the training 8,000er, because it's considered the least dangerous of the 14 peaks over 8 kilometers. Cho Oyu gives you what no amount of training at lower altitudes can, the experience of existing in a zone where your body stops functioning properly. Séamus and Jenny discuss this openly, weigh the pros and cons, and make a conscious decision to skip it. The reasons are pragmatic. It means another year of waiting and another several tens of thousands of euros they don't have. They decide they can compensate for this gap in another way, by hiring the best guide they can possibly find in Ireland. And they find him. Noel Hanna is a living legend of Irish mountaineering. By 2019, he has 8 successful Everest summits under his belt. He was the first Irishman to climb K2, the second highest and far more dangerous mountain than Everest, and returned safely. Hanna knows the route up the southeast ridge as well as Séamus knows the halls of Trinity College. When asked about his preparation, Séamus replies with his characteristic calm. We have complete trust in Noel's guidance. The expedition operator they choose is a Nepalese company, 7 Summit Treks. On paper, it looks solid. In 2019, SST is the largest operator on Everest, with the most clients and permits. But there's a detail that, at the time, remains in the background. Just a year earlier, in 2018, this same company was fined $44,000 by the Nepalese authorities for leading 2 climbers up the mountain without any valid permits at all. In an industry where an operator's reputation can literally be a matter of life and death, this is a major red flag. But the Ireland on Everest team doesn't know about this, or at least no source ever mentions that they were aware. And so, you have the simple math, the kind no guide and no operator can save you from. The maximum altitude Séamus Lawless has ever reached is 6,476 meters on Mera Peak. The summit of Everest is 8,848. And every meter above 7,000 is an altitude where his body has never had to function, on a mountain that doesn't forgive first-timers. Despite all the risks, in the spring of 2019, everything falls into place and the expedition machine kicks into gear. The Ireland on Everest team launches a fundraiser, €25,000 for Barrettstown, an organization that runs camps for seriously ill children and their families. This is important to Séamus. He wants his expedition to be more than just a personal adventure, but something that benefits someone other than himself. Sponsors line up: a construction company, a fintech firm, his own research center, Adapt, even a snack brand with the ironic name Everest Snacks. Back home in Bray, his wife Pamela sees him off, and here's something that makes this whole story even heavier. At the time of Séamus's departure, she is pregnant with their second child. Their daughter Emma is 4 years old, and Séamus gently corrects. She would say she's almost 5. He leaves a home with a little girl and a wife expecting a son, for a mountain where 1 in every 100 people don't come back. The team lands at the airport. The team lands at the airport in Kathmandu. On April 20th, they reach Everest Base Camp at an altitude of 5,300 meters. Base Camp isn't a camp in the usual sense. It's a sprawling tent city of several hundred tents, pitched on the Khumbu Glacier. Underfoot is ice that constantly moves and cracks. All around is the trash left by decades of expeditions, and people from all over the world who have paid anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000 for a chance to try and get to the top. For Séamus, this is already a familiar place. He saw Base Camp in 2017 on his way down from Island Peak. But back then, he was just passing through. Now, he's a participant. Next comes acclimatization, which is perhaps the strangest ritual in all of mountaineering. The concept is simple. To teach your body to function with minimal oxygen, you have to climb up, spend the night, climb back down, and repeat, each time a little higher. It takes weeks and feels like the work of Sisyphus. You climb for a full day, suffering from headaches and nausea, spend a night in the freezing cold, and then in the morning, you head back down, only to start all over again in a few days. Séamus spends a night at Camp 1 at 6,035 meters, then at Camp 2 at 6,474 meters, which, by the way, is already a couple of meters below his absolute record on Mera Peak. And then comes the moment he's been waiting for 3 years, the climb up the Lhotse face to an elevation of around 7,000 meters, just below Camp 3. The Lhotse face is a steep, kilometer-high wall of ice that you have to ascend on crampons, clipped into a fixed rope. And this is the first time in his life that Séamus Lawless has ever been above 7 kilometers. For his body, it's literally a new planet. At 7,000 meters, the air pressure is only about 40% of what it is at sea level. Every single step requires 3 or 4 breaths, and a simple act like tying a bootlace can take several minutes and leave you gasping for air. But Noel Hanna, watching his clients with the experience of 8 summits, sees something amazing. Séamus feels right at home here. Hanna would later say that throughout the entire expedition, Lawless was in incredible form, laughing and singing, and that of his 3 clients, he was the strongest. For a man who, 4 years earlier, couldn't tell a Jumar from a carabiner, this sounds like a fantasy. But Hanna is not a man prone to exaggeration, and his words will be proven true on the summit. After acclimatizing, the team descends back to base camp and waits. Now, everything depends on the weather. They need a window when the summit winds die down, enough to let people go up and come back down. In May on Everest, these windows can last anywhere from a few hours to a few days, and when they open, every expedition on the mountain makes a simultaneous dash for the summit, like runners at the start of a marathon. The only question is which day their team will get, and what will be waiting for them up there. On May 3, 2019, while still in Nepal, he gives his last public interview to the website Irish 7 Summits, which tracks Irish climbers in the Himalayas. Séamus is relaxed, joking, talking about his training and his journey to the mountains. When an interviewer asks him what the first thing he'll do when he gets home is, Séamus gives the answer you'd expect from anyone who's spent 2 months living in a tent on a glacier. The first thing I'll do is hug my family, have a proper meal, and sleep in a comfortable bed. These would be his last published words. Between that interview and the summit of Everest, 13 days, the final summit team, 3 climbers and their guide, Séamus Lawless, Jenny Copeland, Noel Hanna as the leader, and, adding an international dimension to the expedition, Sarai Kumalo from the Republic of South Africa. Sarai had her own story, her own mission. This was her 4th attempt on Everest, and she was aiming to become the first African woman to reach the summit. Each climber was assigned a personal Sherpa, a guide from the local community who knows the mountain, carries part of the load, and monitors the client's condition. A 1-to-1 ratio. That's a good, safe standard. They plan to start using bottled oxygen at 7,000 meters, which is also standard practice. Everything looked professional, well thought out, correct. The sponsors were in place, the charity was active, the guide was a legend, the operator was one of the largest, and there was one Sherpa for every climber. On paper, this was a model commercial expedition, and if you could summit Everest on paper, Séamus Lawless would already be standing at the top. But Everest isn't paper, and 13 days after that interview, the mountain would offer a brutal reminder of that fact. Their summit day is May 16th, and as it would turn out, it was the best day for an ascent in the entire 2019 season. 6 days later, on May 22nd, photographer and mountaineer Nirmal Purja would take a picture that went viral across the globe. An endless queue of people in down suits, snaking along a narrow ridge above a sheer drop, like a line of ants on a clothesline. That photo would become a symbol of everything that went wrong on Everest that year. More than 100 people, all jostling for position in a zone where every extra minute of waiting in the freezing cold brings you closer to death. But on May 16th, none of that is happening yet. The route is clear, the weather is perfect, a clear sky, a moderate wind, visibility for dozens of kilometers, and Noel Hanna's team begins their summit push from Camp 4 almost completely alone. Neither Hanna nor anyone else would later specify the exact time they set out. Usually, summit teams start around midnight to reach the peak by dawn or early morning, giving them enough time to descend before the afternoon winds turn the ridge into a wind tunnel. The route from Camp 4 to the summit is about 900 vertical meters, and at that altitude, the journey takes anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. Every step requires 2 or 3 breaths through an oxygen mask. Every few hundred meters, you clip into a new section of fixed rope. Darkness, cold, the beam of a headlamp carving out a few meters of the path ahead. And so it goes, hour after hour. Somewhere below the Hillary Step, the famous 12-meter rock face you have to scale using a rope just before the summit, an incident occurs that makes it crystal clear what a knife's edge they are all on. Jenny Copeland slips, loses her balance, and is left dangling upside down from the safety rope. At an altitude of about 8,700 meters in the dark, with a backpack and an oxygen mask on, Hanna shouts to other climbers nearby for help, but what happens next says more about Everest than any movie ever could. No one reacts. At this altitude, people are so focused on their own survival that someone else's crisis is no longer their problem. Finally, one climber does pull on the rope. Jenny gets back upright and, as if nothing happened, continues the ascent. A physiotherapist from County Meath, who just seconds ago nearly plunged into the abyss, decides to keep going. On Everest, people make decisions that would seem insane in normal life. But here, it's just another item on the list of things you have to endure. And then morning comes, and everything suddenly becomes quiet and beautiful. The team reaches the summit ridge, and ahead of them, there is nothing but sky. Séamus Lawless, Jenny Copeland, Noel Hanna, and Sarai Kumalo are standing on the summit of Everest, at 8,848 meters, on a tiny patch of snow and ice barely big enough for 5 people if they huddle close. In that moment, Sarai Kumalo becomes the first African woman to climb the world's highest peak. They spend 15 to 20 minutes at the top, taking pictures, and Séamus pulls out his satellite communicator. He types a message to Pamela. The words are simple. He did it. He's on the summit. He's coming home. Somewhere in Bray, County Wicklow, a pregnant woman reads those words on her phone screen, and she must be smiling. The dream that began with a magazine pull-out on a childhood bedroom wall, that lay dormant for more than 20 years, that demanded 4 years of training, 3 expeditions, and all of their savings. That dream has come true. Séamus Lawless is 39 years old, standing on the roof of the world, and all he has to do is get back down. Getting back down, it sounds like the easy part. But on Everest, most people die not on the way up, but on the descent. When the summit adrenaline wears off, when fatigue washes over you like a wave, and you're faced with the same hours of travel you just completed. Only now you have no goal pulling you forward. There's just the long road back and legs that barely obey you. The team begins the descent together, and the first few hundred meters down from the summit go smoothly. At about 8,300 meters, there's a spot climbers call the balcony, a relatively flat platform on the southeast ridge where it's common to stop and change oxygen bottles. Empty canisters come off the pack, full ones go on. A procedure that takes a few minutes and requires minimal coordination. But at this altitude, even minimal coordination is a luxury. Hanna watches his 3 clients closely and would later recount a crucial detail. At the balcony, Séamus showed no signs of altitude sickness, no sluggishness, no confusion, no strange behavior. He was clear-headed and appeared just as he had throughout the entire expedition, strong, composed, and calm. And here, Hanna makes a decision that he will likely replay in his mind for the rest of his life. Séamus is the fastest and strongest of the 3 clients. Jenny Copeland and Sarai Sumalo are moving slower. They need help with their gear, with their pace, with maintaining focus on the way down. Hanna decides to let Séamus go ahead with the lead Sherpa, while he stays behind with the 2 women, where he's needed most. It's a logical decision. It's standard practice. Séamus has a personal Sherpa guide who knows the route. There's a fixed rope he's clipped to, and it's only 200 meters to Camp 4, where there are tents, hot drinks, and relative safety. 200 meters, that's less than 2 football fields. On flat ground, it's a 3-minute walk. Séamus and the Sherpa head down. Hanna watches the 2 figures move away along the ridge, clipped to the rope, and turns back to Jenny and Sarai. It's the last time he will see Séamus Lawless alive. What happens next is known only from the Sherpa's account, and his name, a detail that is unsettlingly absent, has never been published in any source. Somewhere about 200 meters above Camp 4, Séamus stops. He needs to relieve himself. A perfectly natural, completely ordinary act. A basic need like breathing or thirst. But to do this on the slope of Everest, you have to unclip from the fixed rope, the only line connecting you to the mountain, the only thing keeping you from slipping. Séamus unclips his carabiner. Beneath his feet isn't snow. It's blue ice, old, compressed glacial ice that's had all the air scoured out of it by wind and sun. It's smooth, almost like glass, and as hard as concrete. Crampons, the metal spikes on your boots, can grip it, but only if you're standing perfectly still and controlling every movement. On normal snow, if you stumble, you sink in a few centimeters and stop. On blue ice, if you lose your balance, you start to slide, and stopping is nearly impossible. The wind, which had been moderate at the summit that morning, is now starting to pick up. This is normal for Everest. The afternoon winds gather strength as the sun warms the air and creates pressure differences. Séamus is standing on blue ice, unclipped from the rope, when a single gust of wind decides everything. The wind hits him and knocks him off his feet. On blue ice, with no rope, with no way to self-arrest. Because an ice axe won't bite into ice this dense in a single motion, his body begins to slide, gaining speed with every second. By some estimates, Séamus Lawless falls up to 500 meters down the face of the mountain, but that number is just an approximation. No one measured it, no one saw where he came to rest. Hanna doesn't find out immediately. He's higher up, helping Jenny and Sarai, and when the news finally reaches him, either by radio or from the Sherpa, sources differ on the details, his world turns upside down. The man he was responsible for, the man he had called the strongest in the group, has just vanished from the mountain, 200 meters from the safety of the tents. Later, in an interview with Irish journalists, Hanna would repeat the same phrase, over and over, as if trying to explain to himself what cannot be explained. It was just a freak accident. He was 200 meters from the camp. You would think he was safe. But Everest doesn't know the word safe. On this mountain, you're either down or you're in danger. And there's nothing between those two states but a thin fixed rope. A rope that Séamus Lawless unclipped from for just 30 seconds, during the most ordinary, most human of stops, just 200 meters from the end. Hanna doesn't retreat to his tent. That same evening on May 16th, while the wind still allows for movement, he gathers everyone at Camp 4 who can still stand and starts the search. They head down the slope from the camp, shouting into the darkness, shining their headlamps into every crevasse, checking every spot where a body might have caught on a ledge or in a fissure. Hours tick by, the temperature plummets, visibility is near zero, and they find nothing. Not a trace, not a scrap of clothing, not a mark in the ice. The mountain had simply taken a man and left no clues. On May 17th, the weather seals the fate of any further search attempts from the high camps. Winds gust up to 55 kilometers per hour, enough force to knock a fully equipped adult off their feet. And the air temperature drops to minus 27 degrees Celsius, which, with the wind chill, feels like minus 43. In these conditions, exposed skin gets frostbite in minutes, and anyone on that slope would quickly go from rescuer to another victim. Searching is impossible. Hanna and the others are forced to descend. Meanwhile, back in Ireland, a very different kind of operation is getting underway. On May 18th, 2 days after Séamus disappeared, a page appears on GoFundMe with the title, Search for Séamus Lawless on Mount Everest. It was set up by a family friend, Olivia Waters. On behalf of Pamela, the fundraising goal, €750,000. The amount seems enormous, but a search above 8,000 meters on Everest isn't just expensive, it's astronomically expensive. Helicopters that can barely stay airborne at that altitude, experienced high-altitude Sherpas who need to be paid for, every day of risk, drones, satellite equipment, logistics. And this is where something happens that says more about Ireland and about Séamus Lawless than any eulogy ever could. In just 6 days, more than 7,300 people donate. The total amount surpasses €267,000. 7,000 strangers sending money to the family of a man most of them had never met. Simply because he was Irish, he was in trouble, and his wife was waiting at home. The GoFundMe page is flooded with messages of support, hundreds of short notes from people in Bray, Dublin, Galway, Cork, from Irish people all over the world. But at the same time, a sentence appears on that same page that turns this tragedy into a scandal. The organizers state it plainly. The insurance company that issued Séamus's expedition and policy has refused to assist with the search and rescue operation. They simply refused. The company's name is never mentioned, then or later, and the legal details never become public, but the fact itself hits a nerve with a force that's hard to overstate. A person buys insurance for this exact situation, pays for it, flies to the other side of the planet, gets into trouble, and the company says no. To this day, no one knows why. Despite the insurance company's refusal, Noel Hanna organizes a search expedition himself. 8 experienced high-altitude Sherpas, drones with cameras, a helicopter. All of it is brought to Camp 2, and from there, the team ascends to Camp 4 to begin the search, methodically combing the slope below the point where Séamus was last seen. Day after day, they cover the same route, scanning the endless folds of ice and snow, and gradually they start finding his things, one by one, scattered across the slope. His backpack, crampons, goggles, an oxygen mask with a broken clip. Separately, about 500 meters from the suspected fall site, they find his GPS tracker, a device that rescuers believe was torn off on impact. Every item they find is both hope and despair. Hope, because it tells them they're searching in the right area. Despair, because they're finding his gear, but not him. Everest hides bodies with a terrifying efficiency. Crevasses, rock ledges, snowdrifts. There are dozens of places on this slope where a body could fall and never be found. On May 24th, 8 days after he disappeared, the family releases a statement calling off the search. The wording is stark, precise, and filled with enough dignity for 10 people. The extreme conditions at high altitude and the sheer scale of the search area have proven too difficult. We have made the decision to call off the search so as not to endanger the lives of others. Pamela Lawless, his pregnant wife, makes the decision to stop looking for her husband because the search could claim another life. The body of Séamus Lawless was never found. He remains on the mountain, somewhere on the southern slopes of Everest, below the South Col, among the ice and rock, at an altitude that tourists and even most climbers never reach. The Irish scientist, the professor with a gold medal, the man who digitally restored his country's lost archives, had himself become something lost and irretrievable. But this story has one final chapter, one that few people know. Noel Hanna, the man who guided Séamus on Everest, who organized the search, who gave interviews and defended his memory, who marked the first anniversary of his death in 2020. On April 17, 2023, he himself dies. On Annapurna, in Nepal, at the altitude of Camp 4. He was found dead in his tent, just after becoming the first person from Ireland to summit Annapurna without supplemental oxygen. He was 56 years old. The mountains took them both, the man who dreamed of the summit and the man who tried to save him.